Warning. This chapter contains themes that may be disturbing or unsuitable for some viewers. Proceeding is at your discretion, as the author cannot be held responsible for any reactions beyond this point. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Chapter 2. The morning sun, its radiant light filtered through the gnarled canopy of Deadwood Vale, struggled to break through and fully illuminate the ground. Its golden rays stretched out like delicate fingers, grasping for any space they could find. At the very edge of the cursed woods, Ryder stood frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he caught his breath. The air felt heavy with a menacing energy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. His friends, shaken but unharmed, had managed to escape the grasp of the cursed forest, and their hurried footsteps were fading into the safety of the outside world. But Ryder's body remained still, as if anchored to the ground by an unseen force. His feet sunk into the decaying grass, sending tendrils of dust and dirt flying. His head was thrown back, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly gleam. A deep, rumbling growl shook his chest, reverberating through the trees like a wild creature trapped and enraged. It seemed as though the very essence of the forest was pulsing within him, merging with his own primal instincts. Damn it! The voice that escaped Ryder's lips was twisted and seething, laced with a dark energy that oozed malice. It was not entirely his own voice, but rather a sinister presence that had taken hold of him. If it weren't for this boy's interference, I would have had them. They were mine. Ryder's body convulsed in violent spasms, his muscles twisting and contorting in ways that seemed almost inhuman. His fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, a testament to the intense struggle raging within him. His eyes flashed between two colors, one a vivid green representing his own will, the other a sinister black belonging to the dark force fighting for control. The power inside Ryder thrashed and writhed, like a caged animal desperately trying to break free. It surged through his veins, seeking dominance over his body and mind once more. But Ryder refused to back down, his voice shaking but filled with determination. Not yours. He managed to choke out. In response, the entity emitted a feral snarl, its energy crackling and sparking in the air around them. You are mistaken, boy. You have always belonged to me. The ominous words sent shivers down Ryder's spine, but he stood firm in the face of this relentless foe. As if in response to the dark force's words, the thick canopy above shifted and parted, allowing a single beam of golden sunlight to fall upon Ryder's cheek. The darkness hissed with frustration as faint tendrils of smoke rose from where the light touched his skin, a stark contrast against his ashen complexion. Despite the darkness's efforts, Ryder stumbled forward, the beam of light acting as an anchor, holding onto his humanity and preventing him from being completely consumed by the evil presence. But it was only a temporary reprieve before the entity tightened its grip once again, pulling Ryder back towards its clutches. His agonized screams echoed through the air, but they were quickly swallowed by the stillness of Deadwood Vale, a silent cry of agony and resistance that seemed to go unnoticed by the world around them. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath him, roots rising like serpents to bind his limbs and aid in his subjugation. The very forest seemed to come alive, lending its strength to the darkness that sought control over Ryder. Trees swayed menacingly, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, while wild vines snaked their way up his body, further ensnaring him in this battle for his soul. Amidst the chaos and despair, a gentle whisper danced around Ryder's mind like a delicate breeze on a summer day. The soft but insistent voice offered a glimmer of hope in the suffocating shadow, like a lone candle flickering in the darkness. It was a soothing presence, a beacon of light amidst the turmoil. Despite the overwhelming weight of the situation, Ryder felt a spark of hope ignite within them as they heard the comforting words echoing in their mind. It was as if a guardian angel had appeared to guide them through the chaos and onto a path of solace and salvation. As quickly as it had appeared, the sunlight faded and retreated, as though even the veil refused to allow its intrusion. Silence fell once again, heavy and oppressive, leaving nothing but the swaying of twisted branches in its wake. Back in the depths of Deadwood Vale, the air was cold and damp, the stench of decay clinging to every surface. Ryder's body jerked and jolted as if caught in a violent current, his every muscle tensed against an invisible foe. The darkness that had consumed him seemed to writhe and pulse, a living entity of pure malevolence. It clawed at his mind, seeking to smother any remaining flicker of resistance. A flicker of green, so faint it was almost imperceptible, returned to Ryder's eyes, a testament to his unyielding resolve. Despite the overwhelming grip of the dark force within him, there was still a glimmer of his true self fighting to break free. As they made their way through the oppressive darkness of Deadwood Vale, The shadows seemed to thicken and cling to them like a shroud. The force led Ryder towards a clearing where twisted cultists lingered, their decaying bodies moving with an eerie grace. At the center of the group stood their leader, a tall figure cloaked in black robes adorned with pulsating veins of crimson. Their face hidden by a hood, but their glowing coal-like eyes betraying their identity. They were known as Zero, orchestrator of sinister rituals and master of the undead congregation. And at this moment, they regarded the possessed Ryder with a hint of disapproval. "Zero," they scolded in a measured tone. "Your recklessness knows no bounds." Again. The force inside Ryder twisted his lips into a feral grin. "Reckless? I think not. If it weren't for this boy, those insects would be mine for the taking. You should thank me for my initiative, Kuros." A woman stepped forward from the ranks of cultists, her once beautiful face now grotesquely disfigured like melted wax. A cracked porcelain mask hung from her neck, swaying back and forth like a pendulum. She let out a chilling giggle before speaking in a calm yet sharp voice. "Zero, you are a fool," she said. "You will never leave this forest without Father Morabane's blessing. The sunlight may be your enemy, but it will turn you to ash before you can take one step beyond these trees." Zero's once wide grin faltered, his dark eyes narrowing into slits as the words left his lips. "The priest? That rotting wretch." He spat the words, but it was clear the idea had burrowed deep into his mind. His powerful frame trembled with unbridled anger, his jaw clenching tightly. He hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty for the usually arrogant devil, before barking out an order. "Fine. If that's the only way to escape this cursed pit, then bring him here." His voice echoed through the dimly lit chamber, bouncing off the rough stone walls. "But first, I'll need protection from the sunlight. It drains me more with every passing moment." Kuros tilted their head in contemplation at the demand. It's not too far off of what Zero demanded, whether for his own benefit or for the others. A risky proposition, they mused aloud. From the shadows at the edge of the room, a quiet voice finally spoke up. A hunched figure cloaked in tattered rags shifted uneasily and stepped forward. Malrith, a thin and frail-looking man with sunken eyes and pale skin, fidgeted nervously with a collection of odd trinkets hanging from his belt. "I don't trust this course of action," he muttered under his breath. "The boy's body may not survive prolonged possession, and we're toying with forces even we barely comprehend." Zero's nostrils flared in anger at the hesitation of his followers. His snarl cut through the air like a blade. "I don't care about your concerns, Malrith. Get Father Morabane now." There was a long pause, the tension between the cultists palpable as they exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, another figure stirred, a woman with wild crimson hair and a face half covered in thick, leathery scars. She clicked her sickle against her palm absently, the sound wet and sickening as it scraped against her already marred skin. "I'll find him," she said reluctantly, her voice low and rasping. "But if this goes wrong, I'll make sure it's your soul he reaps, Zero." Zero sneered, unbothered by the threat. "Then stop wasting time." His voice dripped with malice and impatience as he waited for his followers to obey his orders. The woman's eyes narrowed to slits as she glared at him with venomous hatred before turning and scurrying away into the depths of the veil. The sickening sound of her sickle dragging against her own flesh echoed through the stillness like a haunting melody. As she disappeared into the shadows, Kuros approached Zero with a sharpness in their voice. "You must be more cautious with your demands. The Father is not a mere tool to be wielded at your whim, and neither are we." Zero let out a dark chuckle. "I'll use whatever means necessary to escape this prison. And once Raphael retrieves the old hag, I will have all the power I need to crush this pitiful world once and for all." Kuros fell silent, but an icy chill filled the air around them, a silent warning. In the distance, unnerving whispers and faint chanting could be heard as Raphael searched for the undead priest. Within Ryder's body, Zero's grin only grew wider. They had waited far too long to leave the cursed heart of Deadwood Vale, and now, freedom was finally within reach. The twisted cultists exchanged uneasy glances as they resumed their positions, their faith in Zero wavering. Yet, they obeyed, driven by fear and desperation. The clearing in Deadwood Vale fell eerily silent as Raphael returned, her scarred form hunched and trembling. Behind her floated Father Morabane, the undead priest. His decaying body was a grotesque mockery of life, draped in tattered robes that seemed to glow with an otherworldly aura. His eyeless sockets burned with cold fire, surrounded by a chorus of whispers that sounded like the moans of tortured souls trapped within his form. The cultists, their faces etched with reverence and fear, fell to their knees in a moment of submission as Morabane strode towards them. Zero, still partially possessing Ryder's body, stood tall and defiant, his lips curled into a sly grin. Well, Zero drawled, if it isn't Father himself. Let's not waste any time. You know why you're here. At first, Morabane said nothing, hovering his skeletal hands above Ryder's chest. A low hum filled the air, the eerie sound of ancient magic building in intensity. The whispers around Morabane grew louder, their tone unsettling and incomprehensible, as if speaking a language meant only for otherworldly beings. Without warning, Morabane's hands began to radiate with a pale, sickly light before pressing down onto Ryder's chest. Zero's body convulsed under the power of the blessing. Morabane's voice boomed out like a hollow drum amidst the chorus of whispers. By the will of the veil, he intoned, you are no longer bound to its shadows. Go forth, but heed this warning, its grasp still lingers. Defy it at your own peril, for you shall return to its clutches once more. The glow spread across Ryder's body like a twisted web of dark sigils before sinking beneath his skin. The possession deepened further, Ryder's face contorting in agony as Zero's presence took complete control. Any flicker of resistance in his eyes was extinguished, leaving only Zero's malevolent gaze behind. As the light faded away, Zero flexed his hands in satisfaction, now perfectly attuned to Ryder's form. He took a slow breath, relishing in the newfound protection from the sun as Morabane's blessing shielded him from its harmful rays, even if only temporarily. A low, mocking bow accompanied Zero's words, his voice dripping with disdain. I must admit, Father, your work is satisfactory. He straightened up, a wicked smirk playing across his lips. At last, I am free to leave this cursed wretch of a forest. The cultists rose from their kneeling positions, their movements cautious and wary. Kuros stepped forward, their tone warning and full of implications. Remember, Zero, this freedom comes at a cost. The veil does not relinquish its claim lightly. Zero's smirk only grew wider, his expression now mirroring that of Ryder's, innocent and unassuming on the surface, but with a dangerous glint in his piercing eyes. His disguise was flawless, Ryder's boyish features perfectly masking the sinister force within. Spare me the sermon, Kuros, Zero spat out the name with disdain, his voice dripping with venom. I'll keep to the deal, for now. The grotesque woman known for her doll-like appearance tilted her head, her broken porcelain mask clinking softly against her chest as she observed Zero with cold curiosity. And what will you do with the boy's form once you've stepped into the sunlit world? Zero's grin turned predatory, revealing eerie teeth that glinted in the dim light. Oh, I have big plans for this body. Plans that will shake the very foundation of this realm. He leaned in closer to Malrith, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper filled with malice. But first, I need to find that meddling group who thought they could escape me. I'll play the part of their friend until the moment is right. Malrith interjected nervously, trying to warn Zero of the dangers he faced. You tread a treacherous path, Zero. If they suspect Dash. They won't, Zero snapped back confidently, cutting off any further objections. This body is mine now, bound by Morabane's magic. And with her blessing, I'll walk among them like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Soon enough, they'll learn that no one escapes the veil's grasp. The air around them seemed to grow colder as he spoke, as if even nature itself feared Zero's intentions and power. With a final, triumphant look at his followers, Zero turned and strode towards the edge of Deadwood Vale. The cursed forest met the open plains, its dark shadows fading away as Zero stepped into the sunlight. For the first time in years, perhaps even centuries, he felt its warm kiss on his skin, thanks to Morabane's protection. With each step beyond the borders of the veil, he reveled in his newfound freedom and power. And with each step, he grew closer to fulfilling his plans for revenge. Zero paused at the edge of Deadwood Vale, inhaling deeply and relishing the sensation of freedom that enveloped him. His grin widened, revealing a set of eerie, inhumane teeth. Time to hunt, he muttered, his voice low and guttural as he set off into the open plains, Ryder's guise perfect and his dark intentions hidden beneath a borrowed smile. With each step away from the cursed forest, Zero felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. He reveled in the warmth of the sun, even though the priest's blessing tempered its touch. The sensation coursed through him like an intoxicating drug, causing a shudder to run through Ryder's body as Zero adjusted to the overwhelming rush of freedom. A low chuckle escaped his lips, filled with dark glee. So this is what it feels like, he mused, running Ryder's hands over his face and chest as if confirming his own existence outside the veil. The light, it no longer burns. The world beyond the shadows, it's mine to conquer. The grassy plain stretched out before him, dotted with small towns and villages and bordered by modern skyscrapers in the distance. It was a world Zero had only glimpsed through human eyes, a world he'd coveted for centuries. The opportunities were endless and the thrill of the hunt was even more intoxicating now that he was unshackled from the veil's grasp. The sight of civilization sent a thrill through Zero's stolen body. Humans, he sneered, the word dripping with disdain. So weak, so fragile. They have no idea what's coming for them. The euphoric sensation of being beyond the cursed forest filled Zero with renewed energy, sharpening his focus on his ultimate goal: bloodshed, revenge, chaos. With each step towards the nearest town, he could feel his hunger for destruction growing, promising a night of terror and chaos in his wake. As he slinked through the shadows, Zero practiced his deception. His features softened, adopting the earnest demeanor of Ryder with ease. The warmth and trust in his voice was a perfect mimicry of Ryder's own tone. "This will do," he muttered to himself, a sly grin creeping across his face. "By the time I am finished, they won't suspect a thing until their blood paints the streets and their lifeless bodies are strewn across the veil." Twilight began to fall as Zero reached the outskirts of the town, the horizon ablaze with hues of orange and purple. Street lights flickered to life along the stone streets, and the sound of laughter and chatter drifted from a nearby household. Zero silently stalked in the shadows, a calculating predator observing his prey. The townsfolk appeared unsuspecting, farmers returning from their fields, neighbors talking about their days over a nice little get-together party, and families enjoying a peaceful evening. None of them knew of the nightmare lurking just beyond their doorstep. A mischievous smirk crossed Zero's lips as he whispered to himself, "Let's make this interesting." With a fluid motion, he glided into the warm glow of a nearby street lantern. His posture was relaxed, his expression innocent, a perfect mirror of Ryder's facade. It was almost comical how easily he could blend in with the ordinary townspeople, masking his true nature beneath a charming mask. But the townspeople had no idea that they had welcomed such darkness into their midst. They went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking in plain sight. Little did they know that Zero's presence would soon turn their peaceful town upside down. Zero's eyes, like shards of ice, glinted with cold malice as he blended seamlessly into their lives. With a charming smile and congenial demeanor, he played the part of the man he had assumed. But beneath this facade lay a cunning and sinister mind, his intentions as dark and twisted as the veil itself. As he walked among them, his very presence seemed to sow seeds of discord and mistrust, a toxic influence that permeated through the unsuspecting community. And it didn't take long for him to spot his first target. Like a predator stalking its prey, he kept a watchful eye, waiting for the opportune moment to strike and seize control over his unwitting victims. A lone man strolled down a side street, dressed casually and seemingly unaware of his surroundings. His gait was unsteady, suggesting he may have indulged in a drink or two earlier in the evening. He hummed to himself blissfully, completely oblivious to the predator lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. Zero's lips curled into a sly, predatory grin as he stalked silently after the unsuspecting man. The thrill of the hunt sent shivers down his spine and his heart raced in anticipation. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate as Zero closed in on his target. The man paused to adjust the heavy sack slung over his shoulder, giving Zero the perfect opportunity to strike. With lightning speed, he darted forward and jabbed the man in the small of his back. The surprised man let out a strangled cry before collapsing to the ground, knocked out cold. "Too easy," Zero murmured, crouching beside the unconscious figure with a wicked glint in his eyes. He flexed Ryder's strong hands, feeling the power coursing through them. The tips of his fingers elongated into sharp, blackened claws that gleamed in the dim light. His disguise flickered for a moment, revealing the true form of Zero beneath Ryder's borrowed appearance. His features contorted into an eerie, almost demonic smile as he reveled in his success. Without hesitation, Zero raised his claws and slashed downward with all his pent-up rage and euphoria. The man's shirt tore open like paper, exposing his vulnerable skin to Zero's merciless attacks. Blood pooled beneath him as Zero's claws dug deep trenches into his chest and arms. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, intoxicating Zero as he continued to strike again and again. Each slash was wild and feral, a physical expression of Zero's inner turmoil and hatred towards humanity. The man's body convulsed with each blow but remained unconscious, spared from feeling the pain of his brutal end. "You pathetic humans," Zero snarled through gritted teeth as he pummeled the lifeless body, so weak and trusting. "You deserve this." Finally, Zero's rage subsided and he stood up straight, his breath coming in heavy gasps. Ryder's hands were slick with blood, the claws retracting as he regained control of his borrowed facade. The once smooth stone street was now marred with the evidence of Zero's savagery. With a sinister smile, Zero wiped Ryder's hands clean on the man's tattered shirt, erasing any trace of his brutal act. He straightened his posture and schooled his features back into Ryder's innocent appearance. "Consider yourself the second after the first," he muttered under his breath before disappearing into the shadows, leaving behind a lifeless heap that was once a trusting human being. The morning sun rose, casting a warm golden glow over the town. But even its rays could not dispel the eerie chill that had settled over the streets and alleys. The air was thick with fear and tension as the news of another brutal murder spread like wildfire. On every screen, the pale and trembling face of a news reporter appeared. "Aurora News here, bringing you the latest developments in the shocking series of events that have unfolded ever since the death of Mr. Harold Owens, brother of Kyle Owens. As you may know, last night another man was brutally murdered, his body discovered this morning by local passers-by." Her voice shook as she continued to deliver the grim details. "The authorities have yet to make any conclusions, but it seems that who or what ended this poor man's life may be tied to Deadwood Vale. All residents are instructed to remain in their homes until further notice. Under no circumstances should anyone venture outside for prolonged periods of time. This is an urgent matter that requires immediate attention. And remember, do not let anyone enter your premises." Panic erupted throughout the town as people rushed to gather supplies and secure their homes. Once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, unsure who they could trust as a killer still roamed among them. Zero observed from a distance, reveling in the chaos he had orchestrated. His heart raced with exhilaration as he witnessed the cracks forming within the town's false sense of security. The truth about the darkness lurking beneath their seemingly peaceful community was finally coming to light. As night fell on the first day of quarantine, Zero moved through the shadows with calculated determination. He had a town to terrorize and a message to deliver, one that would haunt them long after he was gone. The next victim of this wretched day was an older man, his weary steps betraying a stubborn determination to leave his home despite the warnings. His eyes darted around nervously as he muttered to himself, seemingly unaware of the danger lurking in the empty streets. But Zero appeared, his movements fluid and silent like a predator stalking its prey. He wore a facade of innocence, mirroring Ryder's innocent appearance. "Sir." Zero called out, waving and approaching the man with false concern. "You should be inside. It's not safe." The man turned, relief washing over his face at the sight of Ryder. "Oh, lad, it's you," he sighed in relief. "Good to see someone brave enough to—" He never finished his sentence. Zero lunged forward, his hand transforming into sharp claws mid-strike. The man's throat was slashed open, and a wet gurgle escaped before he collapsed onto the cold stone. Zero dragged the body into a nearby alleyway, where he unleashed his fury upon it. He tore into the flesh with savage intensity until little more than a mangled corpse remained. His chest heaved with exhilaration as he stood over the lifeless body, blood dripping from Ryder's hands. "Another one bites the dust," he muttered with grim satisfaction before stepping over the corpse without a second glance. Not long after, another victim fell prey to Zero's deadly schemes. A woman had strayed too far from her home and was now walking cautiously through the deserted streets. She glanced around nervously, but it was all for naught. Zero stalked her like a shadow, silently closing in on her until they were face to face at a corner. "Ryder!" She gasped in recognition and fear as she saw him standing there. "What are you doing out here?" "Just looking for you," Zero replied, his tone warm and concerned as he mimicked Ryder's innocent facade. "It's dangerous to be out alone. Let me help you get home." She hesitated, but Zero's mask of concern was too convincing. She stepped closer, and in a swift movement, Zero struck. His claws tore through her midsection, eliciting a cry of pain as she doubled over. Before she could even scream, he clamped a hand over her mouth, silencing her. With practiced precision, Zero dragged her into a darkened corner and wasted no time in dispatching her. Her blood seeped into the stone beneath her, staining it with her life force. Zero stood over her for a moment, chest rising and falling with exhilaration. They'll never suspect, he whispered with a twisted grin on his face. A town so full of trust, so ripe for chaos. Ryder's hands, now clean and presentable, were groomed with precision. Each hair was combed into place, each crease smoothed out. Zero took his time, ensuring every detail of the facade was perfect before venturing back onto the streets as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The once lively town was now consumed by fear and dread, its inhabitants huddled in their homes like mice trying to escape a predator. Zero reveled in their terror, savoring every morsel of fear that emanated from them. As the night fell and darkness blanketed the town, Zero prowled the empty streets with a sinister grin plastered on Ryder's face. The lanterns flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows that only added to the oppressive sense of dread. But Zero wasn't finished yet. Like a predator stalking its prey, he moved with stealth and purpose through the streets until he reached a modest home. Despite the locked doors and shuttered windows, Zero knew he could gain entry with ease. With a low chuckle, Zero placed his hand on the door and pushed it open with an inhuman strength that caused the wood to splinter under his touch. As he stepped inside, the silence was deafening except for the faint sound of terrified whispers coming from within. Zero's senses sharpened as he searched for his victims, relishing in their attempts to hide from him. He played with them like a cat playing with mice, knocking over furniture and causing chaos until finally reaching the bedroom at the end of the hall. The moonlight illuminated the room through a small crack in the curtains. With eyes like a hawk, Zero took in every detail, from the unmade bed to the overturned chair. His gaze eventually landed on the closet. Ignoring their futile attempts at hiding, Zero yanked open the closet doors to reveal a terrified man and woman. Their faces were pale as death, their bodies trembling with fear as they clung to each other for comfort. Zero's twisted grin widened at the sight of them. Well, he purred with mock surprise. What do we have here? The couple recoiled in horror at the sight of the monster before them, but it was too late. Zero had found them and there was no escaping his sadistic pleasure. With a smooth and calculated movement, Zero reached towards them. His voice dripped with sarcasm as he mocked their desperate attempts at defending themselves. Oh, look at this, he cooed, crouching down to meet their gaze. A reunion in the dark, how delightfully romantic. As the man tried to defend himself with a fireplace poker, Zero easily disarmed him and snapped the weapon in two. There was no fighting back when faced with a creature like Zero, a monster who delighted in causing terror and chaos wherever he went. Nice try, Zero hissed, tossing the broken pieces of the vase aside with a flick of his wrist. The woman whimpered, clinging onto her husband in a desperate attempt to shield herself from Zero's malicious gaze. The corners of his lips curled up into a twisted smile as he leaned closer, his dark eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. He had assumed the unassuming appearance of Ryder, but his true nature was revealed in the sharp glint of his extended claws and the madness lurking beneath his calm facade. Don't worry, he purred, his voice dripping with menace as he reached out with his claws. This won't take long. Without warning, Zero lunged forward with savage speed, tearing into the man's flesh with brutal efficiency. The man's screams were silenced almost immediately as Zero savagely ripped through him. The woman's cries were cut short as well, her lifeless body slumping over onto her husband's as Zero's claws found their mark. The room was filled with the sound of their dying breaths, an agonizing symphony that would haunt the town for days to come. Zero slowly pulled back, savoring the metallic taste of blood on his tongue. His eyes flickered between the two lifeless bodies, his grin never faltering as he took in the gory spectacle before him. It's such a shame, he murmured, wiping his bloodied hands on the man's torn shirt. I could have enjoyed this so much longer. A low chuckle rumbled in Zero's throat, a dark and ominous sound that reverberated through the room. He could feel the town growing more and more terrified by the second, their collective fear only strengthening his own power. After centuries of trying and failing to unleash destruction on this world, it felt exhilarating to finally begin the slaughter. In the distance, Zero could hear faint cooing sounds coming from another room. Maintaining his guise as Ryder, he made his way to the nursery, where a small, fragile baby sat upright in her crib. As he approached her, Zero's lips curved into a gentle smile. Hello, little one, he said in a soft and comforting voice. You have nothing to fear. The baby girl gazed up at him with wide, innocent eyes, unaware of the looming danger above her. Zero could feel his thirst growing stronger by the second, his desire to taste that pure, untainted blood intensifying. It seems you are having trouble sleeping, my dear. Allow me to sing you a lullaby, Zero whispered, leaning closer to her angelic face. His voice was like liquid gold, smooth and soothing, and for a moment the baby seemed to relax under its spell. Her eyes slowly closed as she listened to the hypnotic melody, completely unaware of the true intentions behind it. Whisper, little starlight, soft and shy. Dreams will bloom forth as shadows sigh. Silver streams through midnight's veil. Where whispers linger within, frail and pale. So, hush now, little darling, close your eyes. Rest your head underneath the velvet skies. Gentle winds will guide you there, to a world beyond compare. But tread with deep care, my precious dear. For dreams may hold what we most fear. As the baby slept peacefully in her cot, Zero's eyes darkened with a deep, primal hunger. His gaze lingered longingly on the lifeless forms of the couple as he crept closer to the crib, his movements silent and precise. A flickering shadow cast by the moonlight danced along the wall behind him, adding an eerie aura to his already unsettling figure. A long, flexible tail with razor-sharp blades at the end slithered out from behind him, ready and waiting for its next prey. Zero's eyes were fixated on the sleeping baby, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he prepared to strike. He could almost taste her innocence, feel her precious blood coursing through his veins. It had been far too long since he had fed, and the thirst for blood, no matter where it came from, consumed him. But as he tried to control his tail and bring it in for the kill, it seemed to have a mind of its own, twitching and flipping uncontrollably. Frustration welled up within Zero as he struggled to rein in his own body, but his tail refused to obey. The sound of the baby's soft breaths filled the room like a sweet lullaby, only increasing his impatience. The hunger within him grew stronger with each passing second, threatening to consume him entirely. Just then, a sudden sound jolted him out of his trance, the rhythmic beat of rain against the window, growing louder and louder. A low growl escaped Zero's throat as he realized what was happening. Ryder was preventing him from harming the innocent infant. He knew that Father Morabaine's blessings were fading quickly and he only had a few more minutes before he would have to return to Deadwood Vale. With one last desperate look at the little girl who had unknowingly helped Ryder thwart his plans, Zero wrestled with his own body, fighting against the weight of his vessel's consciousness. The rain outside seemed to intensify, as if echoing the ongoing battle within him. Zero's eyes flashed between the sleeping baby and his own reflection in the mirror, the two faces staring back at him like opposing forces in a cosmic struggle. In the end, Zero growled in defeat. Fine, he relented with annoyance. This one will scream louder when she gets older anyways. With a final malevolent chuckle, Zero left the infant unharmed, stepping over the lifeless bodies of the child's parents as he made his way back out into the dark, eerie night. The once peaceful house was now shrouded in a heavy silence, except for the distant echoes of content snores emanating from the orphaned child. As he walked through the deserted streets, a sense of triumph enveloped Zero and he couldn't contain his twisted grin, his tongue darting out to lick the blood off of Ryder's hands. The game was far from over, and soon the entire town would feel the full wrath of his vengeance. Meanwhile, inside the house, small footsteps echoed through the halls as the traumatized baby stirred in her sleep. Suddenly, a familiar face appeared in her line of vision, Mrs. Yates. Shock and horror registered on her tear-stained face as she cradled the helpless infant in her arms. "Oh my God," she whispered in disbelief, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What kind of monster would do such a thing?" The baby woke up and gazed up at Mrs. Yates with innocent confusion, unaware of the tragedy that had befallen her family. She couldn't comprehend why her parents were no longer there to hold and protect her. With trembling hands, Mrs. Yates held onto the baby tightly, determined to provide solace and comfort in a town now shaken to its very core. As she surveyed the destruction and loss around her, a newfound determination burned within her. She knew she had to protect this innocent child from a world that had revealed itself to be merciless and cruel. The news of the tragedy spread through the town like wildfire, igniting a deep-seated fear in the hearts of every citizen. The mere mention of Zero's name sent shivers down spines as people tried to comprehend how such a horrific event could have occurred. Zero prowled through the streets, searching for his next victim. The echo of a woman's desperate cries for help bounced off the empty buildings, her bare feet thudding against cold, unforgiving stone. Her breath came out in ragged gasps, her lungs screaming for air as she pushed herself forward. With each step, she glanced over her shoulder at the menacing shadow chasing her. Zero moved at an almost leisurely pace, his steps deliberate and purposeful. The sound of his sneakers striking the stone reverberated ominously through the night, sending chills down the spine of anyone who heard it. Ryder's boyish features were twisted into a gleeful grin, his sharp eyes tracking the woman's every move. Despite her best efforts, the woman stumbled on a loose stone and nearly lost her footing. But she managed to stay upright and continued to run frantically, her screams filling the air. She turned a corner, hoping to escape, but Zero didn't rush after her, he didn't need to. "I can do this all night," he called out after her with a light and teasing tone, as though it were all just a game of tag. Just as her hope began to fade completely, her foot caught on another loose stone. She pitched forward and hit the ground hard, a cry of pain escaping her lips. She struggled to get up, but by the time she rolled over onto her back, Zero was looming over her. His shadow stretched long under the pale moonlight, casting a terrifying image over the woman. Her body trembled with fear and she cowered on the ground, her scraped knees stinging as she clutched at them. She looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, paralyzed by his intimidating presence. His towering figure loomed over her like a dark cloud, casting a shadow that enveloped her small frame. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to protect herself from his next move. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was her ragged breaths and his heavy footsteps as he approached her. She felt like a helpless prey, cornered by a predator, trapped under his gaze. Zero tilted his head, his grin faltering slightly. "Aren't you going to get up and keep running?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. The woman blinked, her confusion evident on her face. She opened her mouth to protest or question him, but found herself at a loss for words. A mixture of offense and bewilderment swirled in her mind, leaving her momentarily speechless and unsure of how to respond. Zero groaned, dragging a bloodied hand down his face in exaggerated frustration. "Oh, for the love of..." he muttered before lashing out with a quick clawed swipe. The woman's scream was abruptly silenced as Zero's claws tore across her throat. Blood sprayed out in a gruesome arc as her lifeless body collapsed onto the cobblestone with a sickening thud. Zero stared down at the corpse, his annoyance simmering as he pinched the bridge of Ryder's nose. "Stupid victims and their horror movie cliches," he muttered with disdain. "Tripping, cowering, falling silent, it's like they're trying to bore me to death." He paced back and forth for a moment, his feet squelching in the growing pool of blood. Where's the excitement? The clever escapes? The defiant last stands? Anything besides this tired, stale nonsense? Zero stopped suddenly, exhaling sharply as he straightened up. His frustration ebbed away slightly, replaced by a steely determination. "I need to find someone interesting," he muttered to himself. "Someone who will make this worth my time." With that, he turned on his heel and disappeared into the night, leaving behind the lifeless body of his latest victim. The town was still ripe with fear, and somewhere out there, Zero knew there was a potential victim who would break the monotony of his killings. For now though, he prowled through the streets with a sadistic grin, his hunger for chaos growing ever stronger. The tension in the air was palpable as he continued his rampage, each kill more brutal and theatrical than the last, painting the stones red with blood. A persistent weight pressed down on his mind, an incessant itch that refused to be ignored. It clawed at the edges of Zero's control, like a distant whisper growing louder with each passing moment. His frustration mounting, Zero grumbled under his breath as he paced through the darkened streets, his sharp claws flexing in agitation. But before he could lash out in anger once more, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. "Zero," it hissed, a commanding chill running through its words. It was Kuro's, the leader of the cult that bound Zero to their will through the veil. "You are disobeying orders. Return to Deadwood Vale immediately." Zero snarled back, his defiance dripping from every word. "Did you ever forget that I do not take orders from you, Kuros?" he spat, venom lacing his tone. The blessings of Father Morabane were beginning to wane, Kuros warned sharply, their voice cracking with urgency. "If we do not return soon, we risk exposing ourselves and becoming vulnerable. The boy's spirit grows restless and is challenging your dominance." Zero's growl echoed through the abandoned alleyway as he slammed his clawed hand into the brick wall beside him, leaving deep grooves in its surface. "He will not win," he spat, his eyes blazing with anger. "I am not finished yet. These humans deserve to feel true fear, and I will not leave until I have had my fill." There was a tense pause before another voice joined in, smooth and unervingly cheerful, like nails on a chalkboard amidst the chaos and violence surrounding them. "Oh Zero, darling," came Mrs. Dollmaker's grotesque and lilting tone. "We did warn you about overindulging. It's not good for your health." Zero growled in response, pacing like a caged animal. I do not care about your warnings. Our deal was freedom, was it not? Let me enjoy it. A low rattling groan filled his mind, the sound of Father Morabaine's silent presence. It was both a warning and a threat, the spectral pressure from the priest weighing down on Zero's stolen body. You think you can scare me? Zero mocked, his voice laced with arrogance. You need me more than I need you. Without me, you would still be rotting in that cursed pit and I would not do anything. I will let you suffer if you truly think intimidation will get me to back down. Despite his bravado, Zero could feel Morabaine's hold weakening. The boy's spirit fought against him, bolstered by the fading power of their shared host. Annoyance flashed through Zero as his hands trembled briefly, Ryder's influence slipping past his control for just a moment before he regained his composure. Stupid mortal child, he muttered, digging his claws into his palm until blood dripped from his hand. Stay in your place where you belong. The voices of the cultists faded away as Zero cut off the mental connection, silencing their demands. Turning back to the main streets, his determination hardened. I do not care how much time I have left, Zero snarled, a cruel grin spreading across his face once more. This town still has so much to offer and I will take everything until they drag me back kicking and screaming. With that, he emerged from the safety of the shadows and stepped out into the moonlit streets once more, his eyes gleaming with malice. The pale light cast an eerie glow on his twisted features, reflecting the darkness within him. Father Morabaine's blessings were weakening and Ryder's resistance was growing, but nothing could stop Zero from reveling in the chaos and terror of his newfound freedom. The taste of freedom was intoxicating, like a heady wine coursing through his veins. He was free, for now, and he would make sure to savor every moment of it. Every step he took felt like a liberation, a release from the chains that had bound him for so long. He relished in the feeling of power and control, knowing that it could all be taken away at any moment. But for now, he would indulge in his freedom and embrace the thrill of uncertainty. The once peaceful streets were now painted in a gory shade of crimson. Zero's rampage had reached a frenzied state, his inner darkness consuming him and fueling his every move. Each kill was more brutal than the last, a display of not only his power over the town, but also his dominance over Ryder's will. However, despite being controlled by Zero, Ryder's body began to betray subtle signs of resistance. A tremor in his arm mid-strike, a faltering of his claws before they could rip into flesh. Even a sharp jolt in his leg that caused him to stumble briefly, drawing a frustrated growl from Zero. Stop fighting, boy. Zero hissed through clenched teeth, his aggression causing cracks to form in the nearby building's stone wall. This is my body now. Accept it. But Ryder's resistance persisted, disrupting Zero's flow and making each subsequent kill feel less satisfying. In a fit of rage, Zero lunged at his next victim, a young man who had tried to hide behind a makeshift barricade of crates. The man's screams filled the empty streets as Zero tore into him with ferocity. Is this what you wanted, Ryder? Zero snarled as he struck again and again, a mix of fury and desperation in his voice. To watch your hands do this? To feel their blood on your skin? The lifeless body fell to the ground as Zero continued to rake his claws across the cobblestones, leaving destruction in his wake. Finally, exhausted and panting, Zero stepped back. His movements were now sluggish and erratic, the toll of both Ryder's resistance and his own unchecked violence catching up to him. Fine. Zero roared, his voice echoing into the night. You win this time, boy. I'll return to the cursed forest. If it wasn't for you, this town would have no survivors. With a flick of his hand, Zero summoned his dark power and shadows coalesced around him. Tendrils of inky blackness snaked out into the streets, latching onto the broken and bloodied bodies of his victims and dragging them along with an eerie, slithering sound. I'm not leaving empty-handed, Zero muttered to himself, a sinister grin spreading across his face as he watched the corpses disappear into the writhing darkness. Father Morabaine will appreciate these offerings, even if I'm less than thrilled to return. As the last of the bodies vanished, Zero turned his gaze towards the forest in the distance. The pull of Deadwood Vale was now stronger than ever, Morabaine's hold on him like a leash. Enjoy your temporary reprieve, little town, Zero sneered as he began his journey back to the cursed forest. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Each step brought him closer to Deadwood Vale, the shadows welcoming him like an old friend. Though he despised returning, Zero's mind churned with plans for when he would walk free again. And as for Ryder? His defiance would cost him dearly. Zero's rage burned hotter at the thought of punishing the boy for daring to resist him. The shadows of Deadwood Vale loomed like giants, their twisted branches reaching towards the sky as Zero returned. The air was thick with accursed energy that seemed to pulsate and seethe around him. Inky tentacles slithered and coiled at his command, carrying the bloodied bodies of his victims and depositing them in a gruesome heap at his feet. Zero stretched his stolen body, Ryder's limbs cracking audibly as he surveyed the carnage he had wrought. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the air, mingling with the earthy scent of decaying leaves. He grabbed a limp arm from the pile and swung the corpse in a wide arc, sending it flying into the gnarled branches above. The sickening sound of breaking bones echoed through the forest as the body snagged on the twisted limbs and hung there like a macabre decoration. "Ah, my masterpiece," Zero said, his voice dripping with dark amusement. He stepped over the bodies, kicking one aside as though it were an inconvenient piece of debris. "A bit messy, perhaps, but art is meant to be raw, isn't it?" With a flick of his hand, he summoned another shadowy tendril that wrapped around a body and hoisted it upright. He studied the lifeless form, running his fingers over its cold skin like a connoisseur examining fine art. Some of these might even be salvageable, he mused aloud, tossing the corpse aside with a bored flick of his wrist. The others will be thrilled, fresh vessels for their petty schemes. And, of course, for me to command in the name of slaughter. The sound of footsteps and murmurs drew his attention, and Zero turned to see the cultists emerging from the depths of the forest. Kuroz led the group, their dark robes billowing behind them as they approached with a mix of disapproval and intrigue etched on their face. Behind them, Mrs. Dollmaker giggled softly, her grotesque features twisting into an unnerving smile. Malrith lingered at the edge of the group, his gaze flickering with unease as he took in the scene. My, Dollmaker cooed, her sing-song voice carrying a hint of mockery. "It seems you've been very busy, Zero. Such dedication to your craft." Zero snorted, gesturing to the pile of bodies with a sweeping motion. "Dedication? Please. This is what happens when I'm bored." He gave the nearest corpse a sharp kick, sending it rolling into the clearing. "If I didn't tire myself out, I'd still be out there painting the streets red." Malrith winced, if that's possible, with his rotting face, his expression souring. "You've gone too far. The stench of death clings to you like decay. Even for this cursed place, it's overwhelming." Kuroz stepped forward, their piercing gaze fixed on Zero. "You're reckless," they said bluntly, their voice sharp and cold. "This isn't a playground for your amusement. The Father's blessings barely held, and your indulgence has brought unnecessary attention to our work." Zero grinned, unrepentant. "Unnecessary? You call this unnecessary?" He gestured to the carnage around him, his voice rising with mock indignation. "I call it productive. These fine specimens will serve you well, Kuroz, if you're not too squeamish to use them." Kuroz narrowed their glowing eyes at Zero but remained silent, their expression unreadable as they surveyed the scene before them in contemplative silence. The figure known as Mrs. Dollmaker stepped forward, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as she examined the lifeless bodies before her. Her unsettlingly sweet tone filled the air, a stark contrast to the macabre scene before them. "He does have a point," she said, her eyes scanning over the fresh vessels with interest. "Better than the last batch, I'd wager." Kuroz let out a deep sigh, rolling their shoulders as they resisted the urge to snap back at Zero. Their voice was heavy with disapproval as they conceded, "Very well, but you must be more careful in the future. You've had too much fun with these sacrifices." Zero's dark chuckle echoed through the chamber as he spoke with arrogance and authority. "You say that like it's a bad thing," he taunted. "Besides, I was the one who tore that pitiful face of yours. Never forget that you work for me and the others, not the other way around." A flash of anger sparked in Kuroz's eyes, but they held their tongue. In this twisted world where power held more weight than respect, it was wise to choose their battles carefully. "Understood, Zero," Kuroz managed to say through gritted teeth, their tone cold and controlled. Zero's malicious smile widened as he released his hold on the shadowy tendrils that surrounded them, watching with satisfaction as they dissipated into black smoke that whispered in the air. "Good," Zero sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Now get out of my sight, cultists." As Kuroz and the others retreated back into the shadows, Zero couldn't help but smirk at his triumph. He had proven himself to be a force to be reckoned with, a shadowy figure capable of bringing chaos and destruction at will. And with this newfound power, he knew that his reign would only grow stronger. With a sense of purpose, Zero began to pick through the bodies, searching for the most promising vessels. The taint of darkness lingered in the air, almost palpable as it seeped through his fingertips and guided him in this grisly task. Left alone amidst the gruesome aftermath of his carnage, Zero stood motionless for a moment, letting the eerie silence of the cursed forest settle around him. Then, slowly, his borrowed lips curled into a wicked grin. Zero's voice was calm, but there was a sinister edge to it as he addressed Ryder. Since there is such a lack of understanding around here, I believe it is time we show who's really in charge of this little project of ours. The forest itself seemed to groan in response to the dark energy swirling around Zero, radiating from his form. Ryder's body convulsed and twisted, his limbs lengthening into grotesque shapes. As Zero watched with satisfaction, Ryder's skin transformed into a slate gray hue, resembling weathered stone. His arms and legs became thick and jagged, as if carved from living rock. An oily sheen covered his monstrous limbs, giving them an otherworldly glow under the faint light filtering through the trees. From his back sprouted 6 dark spike-like appendages, their sharp tips glinting with malice. They moved in sync with Zero's thoughts, adding an aura of chaos to his towering form. A segmented tail emerged from behind him, its blade tip etched with faint runes that glowed with dark energy. But perhaps the most disturbing transformation was Ryder's smile, or rather, what replaced it? His lips vanished entirely, leaving a permanent gaping maw filled with interlocking teeth. The smile seemed alive, pulsating as though it yearned to devour anything in its path. With this completed transformation, Zero stood twice as tall as before and surveyed his new form with satisfaction. His void-like eyes glimmered faintly, their emptiness unnerving yet magnetic. And when he spoke, it was in a low, distorted and alien voice, although still recognizable as Ryder's, twisted into something unrecognizable. This, Zero proclaimed, his words echoing through the cursed forest like a demonic chorus, is what true power looks like. He raised a clawed hand, watching as his fingers twitched and flexed while the black appendages on his back moved in tandem. His laughter boomed through the forest, rattling the very air. "Oh, Ryder," he taunted, addressing the faint resistance still lingering within the body he now possessed, "you've given me so much to work with. I've never felt more alive, or should I say, more liberated." Zero turned his gaze upward, scanning the dark canopy of deadwood veil with his void-like eyes. "This is my body now," he declared with both mockery and determination, "and it's time to show the world what true terror really looks like." With each step, his monstrous limbs shook the ground beneath him as the cursed energy of the forest pulsated in sync with his movements. Though Ryder's mind screamed in defiance, it was no match for the sheer force of Zero's will. "This," Zero bellowed, "is only the beginning." The stillness of Deadwood Vale was broken by a faint whisper, carried on the cursed wind. Zero, standing amidst the grisly remnants of his rampage, froze for a moment. His monstrous form tilted its head, the voids where Ryder's eyes once were narrowing in intrigue. A chilling breeze swept through the darkened forest, carrying with it a haunting voice that sent shivers down the spine of those who dared traverse close to the cursed forest. He stood among the twisted and torn remains of what used to be living creatures, his massive form hovering menacingly above the ground. The spikes on his back twitched in anticipation as he turned towards the source of the eerie whisper. At the edge of the forest, illuminated by the pale glow of the moonlight, stood a small group of determined individuals. Their figures were shrouded in shadow, but their resolute stances and tools firmly grasped in their hands revealed their purpose. Elizabeth's presence stood out among them, radiating with both hope and fear. "Hang on, Ryder." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper to herself as she gazed towards the forest. "We're coming." Zero recognized her now, his ears catching onto her familiar voice like a soothing melody. Another one of Ryder's weak-willed friends, no doubt. She stood just close enough to be heard but wisely stayed out of the cursed forest's grasp. A deep chuckle rumbled from Zero's throat, distorted and primal. It echoed through the air like thunder as he spoke with mock amusement. "How precious," he muttered. "They think they can save him." With deliberate movements, Zero began to transform. His monstrous form receded into that of Ryder's ordinary appearance, even his grotesque smile reshaping itself into a more human grin. The sudden normalcy was unsettling, a stark contrast to the terror that had stood there moments before. As the last traces of his monstrous guise faded away, Zero ran his fingers through Ryder's hair with casual ease. A soft sigh escaped his lips, a sound that was both relieved and resigned. He turned his gaze back towards the group, his eyes darting between each face as they waited in tense anticipation. Inside him, He could feel Ryder's consciousness fighting against his control, fueled by the faint glimmer of hope from the approaching rescuers. The two sides battled fiercely, like opposing magnets trying to repel each other. But the one who is in control only laughed harder, clearly entertained at the feeble attempt to resist. His deep chuckles echoed through the desolate forest, filling it with a sense of gloating triumph. "Oh, Ryder," Zero said softly, his tone laced with malice. "Seems like your little friends want to play hero. How touching." With a sinister smirk and a swift movement, he melted into the inky shadows, ready to embark on the next chapter of his twisted game. The darkness seemed to swallow him whole, giving him an eerie advantage as he plotted and schemed. The air around him crackled with anticipation, as if it too were aware of the malevolent energy emanating from his being. This was just another night for him, toying with lives, manipulating circumstances, all for his own twisted satisfaction. The forest seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the impending confrontation. The rising hope of the living clashed with the unrelenting darkness of Zero's reign, and even Deadwood Vale itself seemed to shudder at the looming uncertainty. And as Elizabeth's whispered vow continued to echo through the trees, all were left wondering what fate awaited them in this cursed place. The moonlight cast ominous shadows among the ancient trees, creating an eerie atmosphere that seemed to seep into every crevice and corner. It was a place where nightmares came to life and evil reigned supreme, and now, it was about to become the stage for a dangerous game between hunter and prey. With slow and calculated steps, Zero made his way towards the heart of the forest, his grin widening as he spoke to himself. "This is going to be fun."